Now, the problem with this, because this gets very complicated, of course, and this is where Rudolf Steiner described that these viruses are actually poisons or messengers secreted by your cell to have an effect on the world, telling the world that there's some new danger afoot. This is an amazingly intricate communication system when seen rightly. How Rudolf Steiner knew that and how he knew exactly what modern virologists are saying, I have no idea. But the fact that he predicted this is pretty amazing. Now, you can imagine then that the problem with when you say, well, this looks like contagion because many people in the same place get sick. So the first thing I would say about that is the fact that many people in the same place get sick clearly and absolutely does not prove contagion. Just imagine, in Hiroshima in 1945, I think, they dropped a bomb and a lot of people in the same place got sick. That was not an infection. That was not a virus. And over time, the radiation spread to other villages and prefects, and then they got sick, and neither was that an infection. And they were seeing the same set of diseases, but that was not an infection. The same thing happened in Chernobyl. You started in one place, a lot of people in the same place got sick, and then it started spreading, and people all over Eastern Europe started to get sick. So the argument that the same people in the same place get sick is not part of Koch's postulates. That's not how we prove infectious etiology. But here's where it's interesting. If it's true that if somebody is poisoned and they send out this messenger to their friends, you should do something about this, their friends might also make an immunological reaction, and they look like they're being sick. And it is a sort of contagion in this sense, but not in any true sense of the word. And I would propose that that's actually what's happening right now. Now, the next question then, as I said, I can speculate on what may be the source of this poison. But as I said in this other talk, I just want to reiterate that there is good precedent and common sense in thinking these diseases which we're ascribing to infectious etiology are actually poisons. And one of the examples I gave is if you were a world famous dolphin doctor and you knew about the dolphins in somewhere, the Galapagos Islands, I don't even know if they have dolphins there, but I presume they do, or somewhere, and then they were always fine, and then they called you and said a bunch of dolphins all in the same place are getting sick. And then they said, you can come here, but you can only ask one question about what's happening. And the questions are, A, these dolphins have a genetic disease? B, do the dolphins have a virus? Or C, did somebody put some toxic stuff in the water? And I think most of you would agree that C is almost 100% of the time what happened. And here's another example. When I was growing up, outside of my window in suburban Detroit, there across the street, there was a wetlands. And in the wetlands were all these frogs, and they made all this racket, and I couldn't sleep at night, and they bothered me, but I liked the frogs anyways. And then around when I was 8 or so, all the frogs died, and they didn't make a racket, and at least I could sleep, but I was very sad for the frogs. Now, again, if you were a frog doctor and you went to investigate, what could be the problem? A, they could have a genetic disease of which there's no evidence. B, they had a viral infection of which there's no evidence. Or C, somebody put DDT in the water and that killed the frogs. And in fact, that's what happened. So the question is, what is the Exxon Valdez, or what is the DDT in this current situation? Now, again, this is somewhat speculation because essentially nobody is really looking into this, or at least very few people. And I get all kinds of information now and all kinds of contradictory things. But here's what I think. So number one, let's look at the situation in northern Italy and in Wuhan. So number one, these were two of the most polluted air pollution places in the world. If you look at pictures, you can hardly see the ground because there's so much toxic particulate matter in the air in both places. In fact, to make it even more interesting, a good friend of mine, who's one of the experts in glyphosate research in the world, said that in Italy in particular, and a lot of Europe, they have fairly recently had a dramatic shift to biodiesel, which is supposedly the sort of green fuel of the future. And so they're burning this biodiesel made from corn, and all that biodiesel exhaust is going into the air. Now, I don't know if you want to take a guess as to how much of that corn that's used to make biodiesel fuel is made from biodynamic corn. But I can tell you, I have a very good guess, and the answer is none of it. This is GMO corn, all heavily sprayed with glyphosate, which gets into the body of the corn, which is spewed out into the exhaust, which has the effect of degrading the DNA in our cells. We know that. And so that this degraded DNA is possibly being packaged up by the cells, and that's very similar to what we call viruses. And because it's a new phenomena, it looks like a, quote, novel virus. So that's one explanation. Another one is from my eyewitness people in both places, through me or through people that I know. They're saying that in both of those places, they rolled out a massive vaccination program in the weeks, months, and year leading up to this. Now, what happens then is you're basically injecting heavy metals, particularly aluminum, into people, which also has a neurotoxic and genotoxic effect. We know that from research. And we're putting all kinds of other metallic particles in the air, like aluminum, as part of, this sort of geoengineering program. Now, am I 100% sure there's geoengineering? I wouldn't say that, but I think there's very good evidence that that's happening. Now, so this is all things that are happening in the air, which affects people's lung function and affects the integrity of their genes, which is actually exactly what Carrie Mullis said you can use a PCR test for. If you have accelerated degradation of your genes, then you'll have a lower cycles until you catch it. So if you do something to a person and they only find it after 40 cycles, and then you do something and they only find it after 35, that usually demonstrates they have less degradation of their genetic material. It doesn't mean that was the cause, just less, it's less degradation. So we're putting in at least 3 things that we know of in those spots that are degrading the genes, causing the body to secrete these poisons, and also affecting lung function. And then, from everything I can gather, there's a new sheriff in town called a new rollout of accelerated 4G and 5G radio frequencies. Now, there's 2 things we know about that. One is that radio frequencies of whatever sort cause accelerated degradation of the genetic material, exactly what we're seeing here. And number 2, in particular, the 5G interferes with the integrity of the oxygen in the air, so the oxygen becomes less bioavailable, which will result in deterioration of the lung function. So here we have a situation where the symptoms are degradation of the DNA or RNA in this case, and poor lung function and trauma to the lungs causing bleeding and other symptoms of dry cough. And that is exactly what you would predict from these new toxic insults that are happening, particularly in those places. Now, you then